The universal rulers had always been a distant threat. They conquered countless planets across the galaxy, claiming everything in their path. But when their sights turned to Earth, the world knew it was only a matter of time before they arrived. Despite the terror gripping the planet, humanity did not cower. Leaders across the globe had long suspected the universal rulers would come for Earth eventually. Secret preparations had been made, hidden from the public and even from most governments. Earth had been readying itself for this invasion, though most had no idea. The universal rulers deployed their abominations, creatures that were the stuff of nightmares. These beasts were bred for one purpose: destruction. They had no emotions, no morality, only an unyielding drive to destroy anything in their path. The first reports from distant worlds came as a shock. Entire civilizations wiped out in a matter of days, their cities left in smoldering ruins. The abominations were not just killers, they were an extinction force, a plague sent to erase life from entire planets. On Earth, panic spread as news of the universal rulers' latest conquests arrived. But deep beneath the surface, in secret military facilities scattered across the globe, humanity's last hope was being prepared. While the rest of the planet scrambled to reinforce its defenses, a select few knew that conventional weapons wouldn't be enough. They would need something more, something beyond the limits of human capability. And so, Project Hydra was born. Hydra wasn't just a weapon. It was a collective, a hive of soldiers bioengineered to be humanity's answer to the abominations. The program had been shrouded in secrecy for decades, its development carried out by a coalition of the world's top scientists. These soldiers weren't like anything that had come before. They were linked by a telepathic bond, each one capable of acting independently but always connected to the hive mind. What made them unique, however, was their regenerative ability. No matter how many times they were killed, they would return stronger, adapting to the threat that had defeated them. The invasion began without warning. Abominations rained down from the sky, their ships punching through Earth's defenses like they didn't exist. Cities fell one by one. London, Tokyo, New York, nothing could stop the onslaught. Humanity was on the brink of collapse. But that was when the Hydra soldiers were finally unleashed. In the chaos of the invasion, there was no grand reveal, no public announcement. The Hydra soldiers were simply deployed into the field, emerging from the shadows where they had been hidden. The abominations had never faced anything like them. The first wave of Hydra soldiers went down quickly, overwhelmed by the sheer size and power of the beasts. But then they rose again, faster, stronger, more coordinated. Each time a Hydra soldier fell, they came back with a new advantage, their bodies evolving on the battlefield. The abominations were relentless, tearing through tanks, aircraft, and infantry with ease. But the Hydra soldiers were relentless too. Every death was a lesson, every injury an opportunity for improvement. The more the abominations pushed, the more the Hydra soldiers adapted. Their hive mind allowed them to share experiences instantly, learning from each other's mistakes in real time. It wasn't just their bodies that were regenerating, so was their strategy. As the battles raged on, humanity's last hope lay in the hands of these bioengineered warriors. The Hydra soldiers were outnumbered and outmatched in raw power, but they had something the abominations didn't: intelligence. They were able to predict the abominations' moves, to exploit their weaknesses, and to coordinate in ways that no single creature, no matter how powerful, could withstand. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a war of adaptation. The moment the Hydra soldiers were deployed, the tide of battle began to shift. On the surface, they looked like ordinary humans, but the truth was far more complex. Each Hydra soldier was a product of decades of genetic experimentation. They weren't just faster or stronger, they were something entirely new. Their bodies had been engineered to withstand injuries that would kill a normal human instantly. Even when torn apart by the abominations, they would regenerate, reform, and return to the battlefield. But their real strength wasn't physical. It was their collective mind. From the moment the first Hydra soldier set foot on the battlefield, they were already winning. Every Hydra soldier was connected through a telepathic link, sharing thoughts, strategies, and experiences instantaneously. If one soldier encountered a particular attack from an abomination and found a way to counter it, that information was instantly shared with the entire Hydra unit. They became an ever-evolving force, learning and adapting faster than the abominations could comprehend. Each engagement, each skirmish, was a lesson that made them stronger. The abominations, for all their brutality, were creatures of instinct. They were built to kill, but they didn't adapt. They didn't evolve. They were mindless machines of destruction, following orders with no sense of strategy beyond overwhelming their enemies with sheer force. But against the Hydra soldiers, that wasn't enough. The abominations would strike, tearing through the first wave of Hydra, but then something incredible would happen. The Hydra soldiers would rise again, stronger, faster, more in sync with one another. It was as if they had died only to come back with the exact knowledge of how to defeat their enemies. At first, the universal rulers didn't understand what was happening. They had never encountered a force like Hydra before. On every planet they had conquered, their abominations had been unstoppable. Entire civilizations had crumbled in days, their people slaughtered without resistance. But Earth was different. These humans were different. The abominations began to fall. What should have been a quick extermination turned into a brutal war of attrition, with each passing day tilting the odds further in humanity's favor. For the Hydra soldiers, this wasn't just a physical battle. Their minds were constantly linked, constantly processing and strategizing. But there was a cost to that connection. With every battle, the line between individual and collective began to blur. Some Hydra soldiers started to struggle with their sense of self. Who were they when every thought, every memory was shared with hundreds of others? The bond that made them so powerful was also their greatest burden. They were no longer individuals. They were parts of a whole, pieces of a larger organism that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. As the abominations grew more desperate, they unleashed their most devastating forces, creatures larger and more ferocious than anything humanity had ever seen. Cities were reduced to rubble in moments. Entire armies were wiped out. But the Hydra soldiers didn't falter. They couldn't. Their minds and bodies were designed for this. Every loss was a victory in disguise, every defeat a step closer to understanding their enemies. With each new wave of abominations, the Hydra soldiers regenerated, adapting to the new threat with terrifying speed. There was no grand plan. No single strategy that would guarantee victory. For the Hydra soldiers, the only path forward was to fight, die, and rise again. Their regenerative abilities weren't just physical. They were mental, emotional. Every battle pushed them further, both as warriors and as human beings. But even as they adapted to the abominations, they couldn't shake the growing sense that they were losing something of themselves in the process. The telepathic link that bound them together was both their greatest strength and their deepest curse. It allowed them to function as a single, flawless unit, but at the cost of their individuality. For the universal rulers, this was an unprecedented challenge. They had deployed the most destructive forces in their arsenal, yet Earth still stood. The Hydra soldiers, with their unrelenting regeneration and collective mind, were unlike any enemy they had ever faced. The universal rulers had always relied on overwhelming force to subdue their enemies, but against the Hydra soldiers, brute strength was useless. Humanity wasn't just surviving, they were adapting, evolving, becoming something more than the universal rulers had ever anticipated. The Hydra soldiers knew that victory wouldn't come easily. The abominations were still a formidable force, and the universal rulers had resources beyond anything humanity could imagine. But as the days turned into weeks, it became clear that Earth had a fighting chance. The Hydra soldiers, with their relentless adaptability and unbreakable connection, were turning the tide of war. Every battle they fought brought them closer to victory. Every defeat only made them stronger. The universal rulers had underestimated humanity. They had thought that their abominations would sweep across Earth like they had done with countless other planets. But Earth was different. Humanity was different. And with the Hydra soldiers leading the charge, the universal rulers would soon learn that they were no longer the ones in control. The battles continued, growing fiercer with each passing day. The Hydra soldiers were no longer just fighting for Earth. they were evolving into something far beyond what their creators had intended. As they clashed with the Abominations, the hive mind became stronger, more unified. But with that unity came an unexpected consequence. The individuality of the Hydra soldiers began to fade, swallowed by the collective. Their thoughts, once distinct, became echoes in a vast network of minds. For many, the loss of self was a small price to pay for the power it gave them. But for others, it was a struggle they couldn't escape. Within the hive mind there were whispers of rebellion, small ripples of discontent that grew louder with every passing battle. Some soldiers questioned their purpose, wondering if they were still human or merely tools of war. They had been designed to protect humanity, but in becoming Hydra, had they sacrificed their own humanity in the process? The connection that bound them made it impossible to hide these doubts. Every thought, every hesitation, was laid bare for the collective to see. And yet, the hive mind pressed on, focused solely on the mission, to defeat the Abominations and protect Earth. The Abominations, however, were not static in their approach. The universal rulers, realizing that brute force alone would not be enough to defeat Hydra, began altering their tactics. New Abominations were sent, creatures specifically designed to disrupt the telepathic link that gave Hydra its strength. These creatures didn't attack the body, they attacked the mind. Hydra soldiers, once confident in their superiority, began to falter. Their collective thoughts were infiltrated, twisted by the enemy. Some soldiers fell into confusion, unable to distinguish between their own minds and the corrupted thoughts planted by the Abominations. The once flawless coordination that had defined Hydra was now at risk. For the first time, the Hydra soldiers faced not just an external enemy, but an internal one. The telepathic link, once their greatest weapon, became a vulnerability. The universal rulers had found a way to turn the soldiers' strength against them. Battles that had once been clear victories turned into chaotic skirmishes. Some Hydra soldiers, overwhelmed by the mental assault, turned on their own, attacking fellow soldiers in moments of disorientation. The Abominations exploited this weakness ruthlessly, pushing deeper into Earth's defenses. But Hydra was not without its own adaptability. Even in the face of this new threat, the soldiers' minds continued to evolve. The hive mind, though under siege, began to develop new layers of protection, creating mental barriers to shield itself from the invasive thoughts. Some soldiers took on the role of protectors within the collective, focusing solely on maintaining the integrity of the hive mind while others fought on the battlefield. It was a delicate balance, and for a time, it seemed as though Hydra might lose itself entirely to the chaos. In the midst of this turmoil, one Hydra soldier emerged as a voice of reason. Unlike many of the others, this soldier had not fully surrendered to the hive mind. They retained a strong sense of self, using their individuality as a shield against the mental assaults of the Abominations. Where others had succumbed to the collective, this soldier found strength in their personal identity, drawing on memories and emotions that were uniquely their own. Through sheer will, they managed to push back against the invasive thoughts, creating a ripple effect throughout the hive mind. The others began to follow suit, realizing that their individuality wasn't a weakness, it was the key to their survival. The collective was powerful, but it needed the strength of each individual to function at its best. Slowly, the Hydra soldiers began to reclaim their identities, using their shared experiences to bolster their own sense of self rather than lose it. The hive mind adapted, incorporating individuality into its structure rather than suppressing it. This shift in mentality gave Hydra the edge it needed. The Abominations' mental attacks, once devastating, now faltered as the Hydra soldiers regained control of their thoughts. They became more than just a collective, they became a unified force of individuals, each one contributing their unique perspective to the battle. The coordination returned, stronger than before, as the soldiers fought not just as one mind but as many minds working in harmony. With this newfound strength, Hydra launched a counteroffensive. The Abominations, having relied on their ability to disrupt the collective, were caught off guard by the sudden resurgence of the Hydra soldiers. Battles that had been tipping in favor of the universal rulers were now turning in humanity's favor once again. The Hydra soldiers, reinvigorated by their reclaimed sense of self, fought with renewed determination. But the cost of this victory was not lost on them. Many Hydra soldiers still struggled with the knowledge that they had lost a part of themselves in the process. The battle for Earth was far from over, and while they had won this round, the question remained, what would be left of them when it was all finished? They had become more than human in their fight against the Abominations, but in doing so, they had also become something less. The war continued, but Hydra had learned a crucial lesson. The strength of humanity lay not just in their ability to adapt, but in their individuality. The universal rulers had underestimated this, thinking that by breaking the collective, they could break Hydra. But in reclaiming their sense of self, the Hydra soldiers had become more formidable than ever. The Abominations were powerful, but they could not understand the human spirit, the drive to remain individual even in the face of overwhelming odds. And that was the one thing they could never take away. The final battle had arrived, and both sides knew it. The universal rulers had deployed their most devastating abominations, creatures so grotesque and powerful that even the Hydra soldiers, with all their enhancements and regenerative abilities, struggled to hold them back. The skies were filled with the debris of fallen cities, and the air was thick with the smell of smoke and blood. But there was no turning back. Humanity had come too far, and the Hydra soldiers had become too strong to falter now. They were the last line of defense, and they knew it. The Abominations were relentless, throwing themselves at Earth's defenses with a ferocity that seemed endless. Their numbers were overwhelming, and the universal rulers spared no resources in their final push to take the planet. Hydra soldiers fell in battle, but they rose again, their bodies healing faster than before. Yet, the strain on them was clear. Each regeneration took a toll, not just physically but mentally. The soldiers could feel the weight of every battle in their bones, a reminder that even their enhanced bodies had limits. But this was more than a battle of strength. It had become a war of wills. The Hydra soldiers, though engineered to be the perfect warriors, were still human at their core. They fought not just with their bodies but with their hearts, driven by a deep, unyielding desire to protect their planet and the people they loved. For them, this battle was personal. It wasn't just about defeating the universal rulers, it was about preserving what made them human in the face of unimaginable horrors. In the midst of the chaos, the Hydra soldiers began to use their connection in ways they hadn't before. The hive mind, once seen as merely a tool for coordination, became a source of deeper understanding. They could feel each other's thoughts, emotions, and memories more clearly than ever. The bond between them was no longer just tactical, it was emotional, spiritual. They drew strength from each other in ways that the universal rulers couldn't comprehend. The Abominations were powerful, but they were mindless, driven only by the commands of their masters. The Hydra soldiers, by contrast, were driven by something far more potent, the will to survive and the love they had for their fellow humans. As the final wave of Abominations descended, something shifted. The Hydra soldiers, connected through their hive mind, began to synchronize on a level they hadn't before. They moved as one, not just in body but in thought. Every action was coordinated, every attack perfectly timed. They no longer fought as individuals or even as a collective, they had become something more. The universal rulers had sent their most powerful weapons, but Hydra had become a force that couldn't be broken. Their adaptability, their resilience, and their unity had reached a peak. The universal rulers, watching from their distant command centers, realized too late that they had underestimated humanity. Their abominations, designed to be the ultimate force of destruction, were being systematically torn apart by an enemy they couldn't fully understand. The Hydra soldiers had evolved beyond what the universal rulers had expected, turning every weakness into a strength, every loss into a lesson. The invaders had come to conquer, but they had found a force that refused to be dominated. In the final moments of the battle, the last of the abominations fell. The Hydra soldiers, battered and exhausted, stood victorious. The universal rulers, seeing the devastation of their forces, had no choice but to retreat. For the first time in their long history of conquest, they had been defeated. And it wasn't because of superior technology or brute force. It was because of the human spirit, the indomitable will to survive and protect what mattered most. But as the dust settled and the surviving Hydra soldiers surveyed the battlefield, they couldn't shake the feeling that something had been lost. They had won, but at what cost? Many of them had been pushed to their limits, both physically and mentally. The connection they shared had made them stronger, but it had also taken something from them. The line between individual and collective had blurred, and while they had reclaimed some of their humanity in the earlier battles, the cost of victory had forced them to surrender parts of themselves once again. There was no celebration, no moment of triumph. The Hydra soldiers knew that while they had saved Earth, they had also been changed forever. They were no longer the people they had been when the invasion began. The war had shaped them, forged them into something new, something powerful, yes, but also something they didn't fully understand. They had become the defenders of Earth, but they had also become a reminder of the price of survival. In the end, the victory belonged to humanity. The universal rulers had been defeated, their abominations destroyed. But the Hydra soldiers, the very force that had made that victory possible, would never be the same. They had given everything to protect their planet, and in doing so, they had become something more than human. But as they looked out over the ruined cities, the fallen buildings, and the countless lives that had been lost, they couldn't help but wonder if they had also lost a piece of themselves along the way. The war was over, but for the Hydra soldiers, the real battle was just beginning. They had to find a way to live in a world they had saved but no longer fully belonged to. They had become heroes, legends in their own time. But in their hearts they knew that the price of that legend was a piece of their humanity. And while they had been willing to pay that price to protect Earth, they couldn't help but wonder if they would ever be able to reclaim what they had lost. For now, though, they had done what they were created to do. They had defended Earth. And in the end, that was enough.